The palace was awash in a restless energy as the day of the unveiling drew near. Flickering lanterns cast long shadows against the lacquered walls of the grand hall, their light mingling with the delicate scent of sandalwood and crushed jasmine that seemed to seep from the very stones. Courtiers, nobles, and ministers moved with practiced grace, their silks whispering secrets as they whispered to one another in low tones. Wei Chen stood apart, the weight of countless eyes pressing upon his slender shoulders. His hands, calloused and stained with ink, trembled ever so slightly as he adjusted the drape concealing his masterpiece, the final mural destined to immortalize the emperor's reign. This was no ordinary commission. It was a decree cloaked in paradox, a task that demanded the erasure of the man beneath the crown even as it sought to preserve his power for eternity. Wei Chen's brush had traced illusions and hidden meanings into the delicate folds of the emperor's painted robes, symbols of resistance and memory veiled beneath layers of color and shadow. Tonight, these secrets would be revealed to a court hungry for reassurance, for the myth of an unyielding sovereign whose legacy would outlast the ravages of rebellion and time. Madame Lion moved through the crowded hall like a wraith, her silver-streaked hair catching the lantern light, her piercing dark eyes scanning each face with the vigilance of a guardian. She found Minister Zhou in a shadowed alcove, his stern countenance drawn tight with tension. Their whispered exchange was heavy with unspoken fears and loyalties, a fragile alliance forged amid the palace's shifting sands. The secret romance that bound them was a fragile thread in the tapestry of power, vulnerable to unraveling should the wrong eyes pry too deeply. At the fringes, Jinhua lingered, his bright eyes burning with a quiet fire. Ink-stained fingers clutched a scrap of paper where he hastily sketched the faces around him, the hopeful, the fearful, the calculating. His youthful rebellion simmered beneath the polished veneer of imperial order, a spark that threatened to ignite the carefully maintained illusions. Wei Chen caught his apprentice's gaze briefly, finding in it a reflection of his own hidden doubts and aspirations. With a measured breath, Wei Chen stepped forward, the heavy silk drape sliding away to reveal the mural in its full, haunting glory. The painting was a masterpiece of contradictions. The emperor's figure was majestic, regal, and yet beneath the surface, subtle imperfections whispered of vulnerability, of a man caught between the desire for eternal glory and the inescapable truth of mortality. The folds of his robes shimmered with delicate symbols, hidden memories, forgotten voices encoded in brushstrokes that only the most discerning eyes might uncover. The hall fell silent, the weight of expectation pressing upon every soul present. Eyes flicked between the painted emperor and the living one who stood nearby, regal and imposing in his imperial robes, his inscrutable gaze betraying nothing yet suggesting depths of fear and resolve. Wei Chen's heart pounded beneath his scholar's robes, the culmination of months of secret struggle hanging in the balance. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, some admiring the painter's artistry, others unsettled by the subtle dissonances woven into the image. Minister Zhou's sharp gaze swept the assembly, his presence a reminder of the strict control wielded by the emperor's enforcers. The fragile peace within the palace was poised on a knife's edge, the unveiling not merely a celebration, but a crucible that would test alliances and reveal fractures long concealed. As the evening deepened, Wei Chen withdrew to a quiet corner, the noise of the court a distant murmur. His thoughts drifted to the countless lives erased by history's relentless tide, to the vanished emperors whose stories had been painted over in silence. The mural was both a monument and a rebellion, a testament to memory and oblivion intertwined. The cost of this truth was high, and Wei Chen knew that once revealed, there would be no turning back. The emperor approached, his steps measured, his eyes fixing on the mural with a mixture of pride and something darker, perhaps regret. Their gazes met briefly, a silent exchange passing between artist and sovereign, a recognition of the fragile humanity beneath the imperial parade. Wei Chen felt the weight of his choice settle upon him, the final brushstroke already drying on the canvas of fate. Outside the grand hall, the palace seemed to hold its breath, the winds whispering of change and the inevitable fall of empires. Wei Chen's masterpiece was no longer just a painting, it was a catalyst, a mirror reflecting the impermanence of power and the enduring struggle between truth and illusion. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of awe and unease blending into the night, Wei Chen's resolve hardened. The unveiling had set events in motion that would shape the fate of the dynasty, and perhaps the fate of his own soul. The fragile line between memory and oblivion had been crossed, and the painter was left to face the consequences of the story he had dared to tell. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, and the palace whispered secrets that no mural could fully contain. The vast chamber was cloaked in shadows, broken only by the flickering light of a single oil lamp perched precariously on a low wooden stand. Wei Chen stood before the monumental canvas that stretched across the far wall, his slender fingers trembling ever so slightly as they gripped his brush. The air was thick with the scent of dried ink and aged silk, a reminder of the countless stories that had been woven into the palace walls, stories both told and deliberately forgotten. His eyes traced the delicate brushstrokes that formed the emperor's visage, a flawless image of majesty and strength, yet beneath the surface. Wei Chen knew the truth he dared not speak. The emperor was more than an immortal figure. He was a man bound by fear, insecurity, and the relentless demands of a crumbling dynasty. Each stroke of Wei Chen's brush was an act of both creation and erasure, a paradox that gnawed at his soul. The painter's thoughts drifted unbidden to the faces of those lost to history, the nameless courtiers, the whispered lovers, the rebels crushed beneath the weight of imperial decree. Their memories flickered like fragile candle flames, vulnerable to the winds of oblivion. Wei Chen's heart ached with the knowledge that his art, meant to preserve, was instead silencing these voices forever. A soft rustle disturbed the heavy silence. Wei Chen turned to find Lan Ying standing just inside the chamber's entrance, her delicate frame silhouetted against the dim corridor beyond. Her dark eyes held a quiet resolve, and in her outstretched hand was a small, folded parchment. "For you," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. A reminder that not all is lost. He took the paper gingerly, the rough texture contrasting with the smooth paint beneath his fingertips. As he unfolded the note, his eyes caught sight of a hastily sketched symbol, a lotus blooming amidst shadow, a sign of hope and resistance known only to a few. Lan Ying's presence was a lifeline amidst the suffocating weight of the palace's secrets. Her subtle support breathed new life into his wary spirit, reminding him that even in silence, there could be defiance. But before Wei Chen could voice his gratitude, a deep voice echoed from the doorway. Turning, he saw Emperor Zhu Yujian's imposing figure framed by the ornate entrance. The sovereign's regal robes shimmered softly in the lamplight, yet his eyes betrayed a profound wariness. "The mural must be finished," the emperor said, his tone both commanding and fragile. "Our legacy depends on it." Wei Chen bowed his head, feeling the crushing gravity of those words. The final strokes loomed before him, a testament not only to the emperor's reign, but to the erasure of a man's true self. The painter's world narrowed to the space between brush and canvas, truth and illusion. As his brush touched the surface, Wei Chen's mind flickered to a hidden corner of the mural where he had embedded a subtle mark, a whisper of resistance woven into the tapestry of obedience. It was a faint detail, perhaps invisible to all but the most discerning eye, yet it bore the weight of unspoken truths. He paused, inhaling the cool air that smelled faintly of ink and dust. The chamber seemed to hold its breath with him, suspended between memory and oblivion. In that moment, Wei Chen understood the price of his silence, a soul slowly fading alongside the emperor's vanishing legacy, a truth buried beneath layers of paint and fear. Yet within that sacrifice, there remained a fragile spark, a brushstroke of memory defying erasure. Outside, The palace whispered on, its secrets folded tightly within forbidden murals, waiting for the day when their stories might be told anew. Wei Chen lifted his brush once more, ready to finish what he had begun, knowing that the true cost of his art was yet to be revealed. The flickering shadows of the chamber played tricks on Wei Chen's tired eyes as he labored late into the night. Every stroke felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the invisible burden of countless forgotten lives. The faces he painted were flawless, perfect in their imperial countenance, but he knew each portrait was an illusion, a carefully crafted mask to hide the fragile truth beneath. Memories of his childhood, of his father's teachings, whispered to him in the silence. His father, a master painter who had once told him, "Art is the voice of the soul, the keeper of truth," seemed a distant echo now. How far he had come from that ideal in these shadowed halls where truth was a luxury that could cost a life. Lanying's soft footsteps startled him from his reverie. She approached quietly, her presence a balm to his restless conscience. When she pressed the folded parchment into his hands, Wei Chen felt a flicker of something he had not felt in many months' hope. The lotus symbol was a secret among those who dared to dream of a better future, a future where art could speak freely and history would not be rewritten by fear. It was a dangerous message, one that could bring ruin if discovered, yet it was a lifeline. Wei Chen's heart quickened, but he masked his emotion beneath a calm exterior. Loyalty to the emperor demanded obedience, yet his soul yearned for the truth to live on. The tension twisted inside him like a tightly wound scroll. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked open, and the emperor entered, his presence filling the chamber with an oppressive gravity. Zhu Yujian's inscrutable gaze met Wei Chen's, a silent reminder of the stakes at play. The mural must stand as an eternal testament, the emperor intoned, voice both stern and wary. No cracks in the facade. Wei Chen bowed deeply, feeling the weight of imperial expectation settle on his shoulders. Yet beneath that weight stirred a quiet rebellion, a determination to let the hidden message survive beyond the brush's final stroke. As the night deepened, Wei Chen worked with painstaking care, blending truth and illusion into a tapestry that would both preserve and erase. Each stroke was a delicate balance, a dance on the edge of memory and oblivion. When the first light of dawn crept through the narrow windows, the mural stood complete, a masterpiece of haunting beauty and silent defiance. Wei Chen stepped back, eyes lingering on the faint lotus hidden among the imperial grandeur. The price of silence was high, but within it lay the fragile hope that memory might yet endure. The soft glow of dawn barely penetrated the thick latticework windows of the painter's chamber, casting elongated shadows over the scattered brushes and inkstones. Wei Chen sat silently before his easel, the muted colors of his latest work blurring at the edges of his weary eyes. Outside, the palace stirred, servants scurried, guards paced, and the distant murmur of officials echoed through the stone corridors. But within these walls a different tension simmered, one born not of politics or power, but of art, integrity, and the fragile thread that held truth and illusion in delicate balance. "Master Wei," a youthful voice whispered urgently, breaking the fragile quiet. Jinho slipped through the door, clutching a folded sheet of rice paper, his ink-stained fingers trembling ever so slightly. His bright eyes, usually sparkling with curiosity, now burned with determined fire. Wei Chen looked up, his expression softening. "What is it, Jinho?" Without hesitation, Jinho unfolded the paper, revealing a sketch raw in its defiance, an unfiltered glimpse of life beyond the emperor's idealized visage. The lines were jagged, the features more human, more vulnerable than any sanctioned portrait. It was a stark rebellion against the perfection demanded by the court, a silent scream etched in ink. This cannot be shown," Wei Chen murmured, torn between admiration and fear. The consequences would be severe. Jinho's gaze did not waver. "Then let it be known that we saw, that we remember. If the palace erases truth, then we must find ways to preserve it, even in whispers and shadows." The weight of his apprentice's courage settled heavily on Wei Chen's chest. For so long he had painted shadows behind silken screens, erasing and embellishing as commanded. Now, Jin Ho's audacity challenged the very foundation of his existence within these walls. Their fragile moment shattered when the heavy footsteps of Minister Xiao thundered down the corridor. The political enforcer's dark robes seemed to swallow the light as he entered, his stern gaze sweeping the chamber like a hawk seeking prey. Jin Hoa Zhou's voice was cold, a blade sharpened by authority. "What is this?" Jin Ho met the minister's glare unflinchingly, holding up the sketch like a banner of defiance. "A truth, minister. One the court refuses to see." Xiao's lips thinned into a hard line. "Such insolence will not be tolerated. You would endanger us all with this rebellion." Wei Chen rose slowly, stepping between the two. "Minister Xiao, these are but exercises of the apprentice's hand, exploring the essence of our art. There is no threat here." Xiao's eyes flicked to Wei Chen, a silent threat passing between them. "Be wary, painter. Loyalty is not optional within these walls." The minister's departure left a heavy silence in his wake, broken only by Jin Ho's steady breathing. "I will not hide behind silence," the apprentice declared softly. "If truth must be veiled, then I will be the thread that unravels the tapestry." Wei Chen's heart stirred with a tumult of pride and dread. He had taught Jin Hoa the strokes that captured beauty and power, but never had he intended to nurture rebellion. As the day wore on, whispers of Jin Ho's defiance spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. Some expressed quiet admiration, others fearful condemnation. Wei Chen found himself at a crossroads, his duty to the emperor, the fragile safety of his position, and the growing fire within him kindled by Jin Ho's courage. That evening, as the painter prepared his brushes, Lan Ying approached with a subtle grace, her eyes glinting with unspoken understanding. She slipped a folded note into Wei Chen's hand with a gentle smile. "You are not alone," she whispered before vanishing into the shadows. The note bore a simple message: truth lives in the brush, even when the eyes cannot see. Wei Chen stared into the flickering candlelight, the weight of his choices pressing down like the heavy imperial robes that adorned the palace halls. Jin Ho's defiance was more than youthful rebellion. It was a beacon, fragile yet brilliant, illuminating the path he must now walk. The next days would test them all: the painter, the apprentice, and the empire's fragile legacy as the brush strokes of memory and oblivion danced ever closer to the edge of revelation and ruin. And as the palace walls seemed to close in, Wei Chen realized that art was no longer just a tool of preservation or erasure. It was a weapon, a refuge, and perhaps the last hope for truth in a world desperate to forget. The heavy wooden doors of the imperial study closed behind Wei Chen with a soft but final thud, the echo swallowed quickly by the vast silence of the forbidden chambers. He stood for a moment in the dimness, the faint scent of sandalwood incense curling in the air, mingling with the cold weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Before him, seated behind a carved screen that filtered the flickering candlelight into fractured patterns, was Emperor Zhu Yujian, the man he had painted countless times, yet never truly known. The emperor's gaze was inscrutable as ever, but there was a crack in the facade tonight, a vulnerability that Wei Chen could not ignore. Zhu Yujian's hands, adorned with the delicate embroidery of imperial robes, rested lightly on the arm of his chair, but they trembled ever so slightly. The heavy crown atop his head seemed less a symbol of power and more a burden pressing him into shadow. "Wei Chen," the emperor began, his voice low and unexpectedly fragile, "you have seen the court's splendor and its whispers. You have witnessed the smiles of my ministers and the coldness behind their eyes. Tell me what you see when you look at me." Wei Chen hesitated. The question was as much a challenge as a confession. He had spent months capturing the emperor's likeness: the proud chin, the sharp eyes that commanded armies and courtiers alike, but now, in this hushed moment, those images felt incomplete, hollow. He looked into those eyes again, searching for the man behind the throne. I see a man who carries a weight far beyond what his shoulders should bear, Wei Chen answered carefully. A man who balances the splintering empire on the edge of his patience. The emperor nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. They see only the crown, the robes, the scripts of power. But I fear the day when even my own likeness will be nothing but a shadow on a wall, forgotten, erased. Wei Chen's heart tightened. The emperor's voice bore the raw edge of loneliness, a stark contrast to the commanding figure so many revered. He thought of the murals hidden deep within the palace, where past emperors were painted with reverence, only to be whitewashed from memory when their reigns ended in disgrace or defeat. The paradox of immortality through art preserving power, while erasing the man, was no longer abstract. It was flesh and blood before him. You fear oblivion, Wei Chen said softly, but your portrait, your legacy will endure. Endure as what? Zhu Yujian's gaze pierced through the dim light. An immortal ideal, a flawless emperor, or as a man, flawed and mortal, who faced rebellion and despair. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of unspoken truths pressing heavily in the air. Wei Chen's mind raced with the delicate balance he must strike in his paintings to honor the emperor's dignity, while revealing the fragile humanity beneath. Could his art carry such complexity without inviting ruin? A sudden noise interrupted the moment, a distant clatter of armor, the faint march of palace guards patrolling the corridors. The sounds were a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers lurking beyond these walls, of the conspiracies brewing in shadows, and of the isolation that cloaked the emperor like a second skin. Zhu Yujian's expression hardened for a moment, regaining the regal composure expected by all. Yet the vulnerability lingered beneath, a secret shared only in the quiet of this room. Wei Chen, the emperor said, extending a small, intricately carved jade pendant from beneath his sleeve, take this. It is a token of hope, fragile and precious. Let it remind you that even power is fleeting, but memory can endure beyond the reach of time and fear. Wei Chen accepted the pendant reverently, feeling the cool smoothness of the jade against his palm. It was a symbol both of the emperor's trust and of the fragile legacy he sought to preserve. As he prepared to leave, Wei Chen looked once more at the man behind the throne, not the immortal ideal, but the fragile, haunted soul beneath the robes. The encounter left a profound impression, deepening the painter's understanding of the delicate dance between image and truth, between memory and oblivion. Outside the study, the corridors of the palace seemed colder and more foreboding than ever, yet within Wei Chen burned a quiet resolve. His brush would carry not only the emperor's image, but the weight of his fears and hopes. In the impermanence of power, perhaps art could capture a fleeting truth, however fragile. As the candlelight dimmed behind the carved screen, Wei Chen stepped back into the shadows, the pendant warm against his chest, a silent promise of the delicate balance he must now maintain between loyalty and truth, between creation and erasure. The weight of the empire's fate rested not only in armies and decrees, but in the brushstrokes of a painter who dared to glimpse the man behind the mask. And as the night deepened, so too did the fragile hope that even in the vanishing of emperors, some memory might endure. The dim glow of lantern light flickered softly against the delicate rice paper stretched across the wooden easel. Young Wei Chen sat cross-legged on the polished floorboards, his breath shallow with anticipation as his father's brush danced across the sheet. The elder painter's hands moved with the fluid certainty of a river's current, each stroke a prayer, a whisper of life captured in ink. Wei Chen's eyes widened, drinking in the way the black lines swirled and converged into the elegant form of a crane, wings outstretched against the pale backdrop. The scent of ink mingled with the faint aroma of sandalwood incense, creating a sacred atmosphere that wove itself into Wei Chen's very bones. "Observe, son," his father murmured, voice calm but infused with intensity. "Painting is not merely copying what you see. It is the breath behind the form, the soul beneath the surface. Without that, you merely reproduce shadows. Wei Chen's small fingers twitched in his lap, atching to pick up the brush, to capture the elusive spirit his father summoned. But the weight of expectation pressed down on him. He was the son of Wei Yong, a painter revered across the province, a man whose art had adorned the halls of scholars and nobles alike. Every stroke he made carried the legacy of generations. That night, under the watchful eyes of his parents, Wei Chen attempted his first brushwork. The strokes were tentative and uneven, the crane's wings stiff and lifeless. His father's gaze was steady as he examined the work, and then he sighed softly. Discipline. Wei Chen, you must not let your heart wander too far, but neither must you cage it entirely. The brush is a bridge, you must learn to walk it with balance. The young boy's chest tightened. Was this a reprimand, a challenge? His father's words echoed in his mind, shaping the path he would follow with reluctant devotion. In the quiet moments after, his mother approached, her presence gentle as a spring breeze. She knelt beside him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Do not be discouraged, my son," she whispered softly. "Your father's lessons are hard, but they are gifts. Within you lies a spark, let it grow, but remember to honor those who came before." Years passed, each one layered with countless hours of practice beneath his father's critical eye. Wei Chen learned to wield the brush with precision, to blend tradition and subtle expression. Yet beneath the surface, a restless spirit stirred, a yearning to explore beyond the confines of inherited technique, to infuse his art with truths unspoken. Now, standing alone in his chamber within the imperial palace, Wei Chen traced a charcoal sketch on thin silk, a fragment of an ancient landscape his father once painted. The lines, so familiar yet distant, seemed to pulse with memories of a simpler time, before the shadows of courtly intrigue had darkened his path. His fingers trembled slightly, the burden of expectation mingling with the growing weight of his own doubts. The faces of his parents, their teachings, their hopes, hovered at the edge of his mind like ghosts. Was he betraying them by bending his brush to serve the emperor's paradoxical decree? Or was he fulfilling a deeper legacy, one that demanded courage to confront both beauty and erasure? The chamber grew colder as the night deepened, but Wei Chen remained rooted in silent contemplation. His brush hovered over the silk, poised between honoring the past and shaping an uncertain future. The shadows of his youth whispered around him, urging him to remember who he was and who he must become. Outside, the faint murmur of the palace stirred, a reminder that the world beyond his memories awaited, fraught with peril and promise alike. As dawn approached, Wei Chen resolved to carry the echoes of his lineage forward. Even as he faced the vanishing emperors and the fragile edge of mortality that defined his art. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the shadows of the past had lent him strength, a quiet flame flickering against the encroaching darkness. And with that, Wei Chen dipped his brush into ink, beginning a new stroke that would bind memory and oblivion in a dance only he could lead. The chamber was hushed save for the delicate scratch of Wei Chen's brush against the rough stone wall. Lantern light flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe life into the sprawling mural before him. This was no ordinary painting, it was a solemn testament, a fragile vessel of memory and meaning in a world determined to forget. Wei Chen's slender fingers trembled slightly as he dipped his brush into the ink, the deep black swirling like liquid night. He traced the folds of the emperor's silken robes, deliberately weaving into the fabric delicate, almost imperceptible symbols. Curling dragons whose tails twisted into the shape of broken chains, blossoms whose petals concealed the shapes of distant faces, and veins of ink that pulsed like hidden rivers beneath the surface. Each stroke was a secret spoken without words, a quiet rebellion masked beneath imperial grandeur. As he worked, Wei Chen recalled Madame Lion's words from the night before. She had come to him silently, her silver-streaked hair shimmering like the moonlight filtering through the screens. Her dark eyes held the weight of decades, of whispered secrets and lost glories. The murals, she had said softly, are more than images. They are the dynasty's heartbeat, its memory carved in shadow and light. But memory is fragile and history cruel. Your brush can speak truths where words fail. Those words lingered in his mind as he painted, urging him to embed every hidden message with care and precision. Wei Chen knew the peril should his subversion be uncovered. It would mean ruin not only for him, but for all those who dared to remember differently. Yet, the thought of surrendering the emperor's true face, the human beneath the crown, was a torment he could not abide. Nearby, Jinho sat cross-legged, his young eyes bright with a mixture of admiration and unease. His ink-stained fingers tapped nervously on the edge of his sketchbook as he watched Wei Chen's deliberate hand. "Master," he ventured cautiously, "why hide these symbols? Will they not be lost to all but a few?" Wei Chen smiled faintly, the lines of fatigue etched deep beneath his thoughtful eyes. "It is not for all to see, Jin He. Some truths are whispered only to those who listen closely, to those who dare to remember when silence is commanded. These symbols are a promise that even if the dynasty falls and the emperor's name fades, there will remain echoes of what once was." The apprentice's gaze flickered with newfound resolve. "Then we become keepers of memory, even in shadow." "Yes," Wei Chen murmured, "keepers in the dark." Hours passed in a solemn rhythm, the mural slowly taking form beneath his brush. The emperor's face was regal, yet beneath the royal veneer, Wei Chen painted veins of vulnerability, subtle shifts in expression, a hint of wariness in the eyes, a fleeting shadow of doubt. Around the figure, the intricate background blossomed into a labyrinth of symbols, phoenix feathers intertwined with faded scrolls, ghostly silhouettes of forgotten courtiers, and winding rivers that vanished into mist. Each element was chosen to tell a story beyond the official narrative, a tapestry woven with strands of loss and resistance. When the final stroke was laid, Wei Chen stepped back, his heart pounding in the cavernous chamber. The mural glowed softly in the lantern light, a grand image both breathtaking and haunting. The emperor stood immortalized, his power preserved, yet the hidden signs whispered truths only a discerning eye might perceive. The silence was broken only by the distant echo of footsteps in the palace corridors, a reminder that shadows watched, ever vigilant. Madame Lion's presence was suddenly felt beside him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You have done more than paint, Wei Chen. You have breathed life into memory itself, but beware, the palace does not forgive those who challenge its silence." Wei Chen met her gaze resolutely. "Then let them come. If my art can hold the past against oblivion, even in fragments, it is worth the risk." The chamber seemed to hold its breath as the two figures stood in the quiet glow, the mural a silent testament to the cost of truth and the fragility of legacy. Beyond the walls, the empire trembled on the edge of collapse, yet within this hidden sanctuary, a small flame of defiance flickered, fragile but unextinguished. As Wei Chen prepared to leave the chamber, Jin He approached, his youthful voice steady despite the weight of their secret. "Master, what will become of us, the artists, when the empire falls?" Wei Chen's eyes softened, reflecting both sorrow and hope. "We will become the keepers of stories, the guardians of memory. Our brushstrokes may fade, but the truths they hold will whisper on in the hearts of those who dare to remember." And with that, the painter of vanishing emperors stepped back into the shadows, carrying with him the silent legacy of a dynasty on the brink of oblivion. The mural's secret was sealed, a final act of rebellion painted in ink, shadow, and the enduring hope of memory. The chamber grew cold as the lantern flames flickered low, but Wei Chen's resolve burned bright. In this moment, beneath the weight of history's gaze, he understood that art was not merely creation, it was survival, resistance, and the fragile bond between past and future. The emperor's legacy would vanish from the pages of history, but through Wei Chen's hidden symbols, it would live on, a whisper against the silence, a brushstroke against oblivion. And as the first light of dawn touched the palace roofs, a new chapter of whispered truths quietly began.